This is a Patriots Podium, and I am Conservative Party State Chairman Jerry Kassar. Welcome. Patriots Podium is a regular party podcast that brings newsmakers, elected officials, and conservative leaders to you as they participate in the freewheeling discussion on a wide range of current topics. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by New York State Senate Republican leader Rob Ortt. The senator represents Niagara and Orleans counties in western New York. He was first elected to the Senate in 2014, having previously served as a local government official. His Republican Senate colleagues elected him minority leader in June of 2020. A decorated veteran of the war in Afghanistan, First Lieutenant Ortt received the Bronze Star, Army Commendation Medal, Afghanistani Campaign Medal, and Combat Infantry Badge. In the Senate, he has earned a reputation for leading his members in efforts to restore public safety, hold the line on spending and taxes, oppose Democratic attempts to corrupt New York's election laws, and oppose wonky ideas such as banning gas hookups. Thank you, Senator Ortt, for being with us.
Chairman Kassar, it's great to see you. Great to be with you, and great to be with your viewership.
Thank you. Let me start with something that might be a little bit off topic. You're a decorated Afghan war veteran. Could you give us your thoughts on the Biden administration's withdrawal and your feelings about the current status of the United States in the region?
You know, when that was, I think it was last summer, a year ago, that was a very difficult time for me, if I'm going to be honest. It was, it brought back a lot of emotions. It brought back a lot of, feelings about the men who I served with over there, the men who I led over there, and the men who never came home from over there. And to know the effort, the blood, the sacrifice, the treasure that was spent in that decade-plus war in Afghanistan. And I thought it was time. I mean, I did think it was time to leave. I thought it was time for the United States military, at least in a combat presence, to exit, that phase and to exit that part of the operation. But there's a way to break contact. There's a way to leave. And what we saw over there was really a retreat. It wasn't a withdrawal. It was a retreat. And it was an abdication of our responsibility, not only to the Afghans, people who actually fought alongside us, people who put themselves at great risk to support our efforts, but it was an abdication of our responsibility to Americans and to American family members who lost loved ones over there. Because how you could watch that and not think it was all for nothing was beyond me. And I was there, and I almost felt I was.
Was it our generation's Vietnam War?
I don't know. What I'll say that maybe a differentiating factor was that ultimately we went into Afghanistan under much clearer reasons as far as why we went in there. Vietnam was always, I think, from the outset, there was a lot of questions about why we needed to be there. Was it the right spot? Were we stopping the Soviets? Afghanistan gave shelter to Osama bin Laden. So there should be no question about why we went in there. And ultimately, we killed Osama bin Laden. And I don't think we would have killed him, but for our military presence in Afghanistan. So, or we certainly wouldn't have killed him in 2012. So I think there are differences, but I think how we left. You think of that helicopter leaving the embassy in Saigon, and you think about the Afghan clinging to the airplane as it left Afghanistan. And I think ever since then, Chairman, you have seen a much more dangerous world, whether it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine, whether it's Chinese aggression towards Taiwan. But don't ever think that that's not connected, because I think the whole world saw weakness on display and a weak administration in the President Biden's administration, and that has continued to today.
Thank you. So getting back to to the legislature and the session saw the Democrats attempt to run the table on a number of issues. Yet, unquestionably, your conference and in the Assembly GOP conference had some victories that, so to speak, items that fell off the table that you were really played a big role in causing. I mean, they really never talk much about what didn't happen. They tend to talk in the media about what did happen. But could you give us some of the high points and low points for you in Albany over the past few months?
Yeah, I mean, when you're in the minority, it is how you have to be effective and how you measure effectiveness, both on behalf of your constituents and on behalf of the conference. It's very different, right? We have to. There's times that we're willing to work with our colleagues across the aisle to get some positive things done or things, but most of the time we have to act. We have to try to stop or make bad policy somewhat more palatable. So, I think about the role we played during the nomination of the justices to the High Court, the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in New York. Um, the governor nominated Hector LaSalle, a very qualified judge, no doubt a Democrat-leaning judge, but a qualified judge and a judge that I think would put the law and the Constitution before anything else. And certainly as Republicans and conservatives and in the minority, that's the most we can hope for, really, for any judge, I think, is that they will put the law and the Constitution ahead of their own ideology or own beliefs in some cases. And that wasn't good enough for my friends in the Democratic conference in the Senate, because that was a disqualifier. They wanted a judge that was going to put their beliefs ahead of the law. They wanted a judge that was going to legislate as an activist, progressive judge. And so Hector LaSalle was a non-factor. They didn't want to bring him to the floor for a vote. We filed a lawsuit that said that the nominee has a right to a vote on the Senate floor of the full Senate. And we got our say. He was forced to come to the floor. He was defeated, unfortunately, but I think it was an important part to say that the Senate Democrats and the Judiciary Committee cannot just block a nominee, that you have to put them to the floor, that the entire state and their representatives in the Senate get a say on these matters, and not just 8 or 9 Democratic senators. And so that was a highlight, because I think it allowed us to exercise some influence over the process, and ultimately, I think, influenced the judges who did get appointed. So there was no doubt a progressive judge, Rowan Wilson, who is now the chief judge, but he was already on the court. The new judge, Judge Caitlin Halligan, I'm hopeful it will be a little bit, again, more in the Hector LaSalle lane, a little bit more of a moderating justice who will at least look at the law before making a determination. Now we'll still see how that happens, but I think, should that be the case, then I think our conference played a bit major role in that. The natural gas stove piece, while it's terrible, the governor's initial proposal was far worse. It would have applied to even existing homes, but for our opposition to that across the state, I think that might have been what had happened. But we were able to hammer that and educate people on that so much that the Senate Democrats and Assembly Democrats, they didn't even want to go in that direction, because they knew it would be costly on New Yorkers, and it would make no sense and probably lose them votes. So those are two issues, I think, where we had a positive impact on the Democrats. We did get some things passed, local bills for our members that are important to our constituents and our taxpayers. But obviously there were a lot of bad things that did ultimately end up happening. And it's our job to educate New Yorkers on the impacts and on who's responsible. Because I think a lot of people sometimes fail to understand. They're upset about crime, but they fail to understand why crime has increased. They're upset about affordability and the lack of affordable housing, but they don't understand why that's the way it is and who is to hold accountable for that. And that's our job on our side, to make sure the public understands that.
Good, thank you. Let me talk a little about the governor. She's been accused of being weak, jeopardizing her ability to set policy and or move her agenda. I mean, you served as leader under Andrew Cuomo and now Hochul. How has the change in leadership and style affected state policy and the GOP Senate conference?
So I was only there, Chairman, as you pointed out, but I was only there for a short time with Governor Cuomo. Now, there's no question I was in the Senate while he was the governor. He had his own style, which was probably ultimately created far more enemies than it did allies. A lot of his allies, I think, over time were allies out of fear or out of convenience, and that works until it doesn't work. And that's just the way it goes. You know, you can
Uh,
with Governor Hochul, who I've known for several years. She's obviously was a Congress representative up in my area. She was a county clerk in Erie County, which is just south of where I am. But she has, in my view, so policy aside, right? Forget for a second my differences with her on natural gas bans or on the mandates around COVID and around businesses and around vaccine mandates. We have very different opinions on issues like that. On guns, on the Second Amendment, we have very different opinions. Take that aside for a second. She has failed to do even the most basic things. Get a court nominee through. She could not get Hector LaSalle through. The first time ever, or in a long time anyways, that the Senate openly blocked a gubernatorial appointment to the bench of a qualified justice. That was in January or February. Her first budget was over a month late. It was the latest budget in over 13 years. And I couldn't point to one major policy win for the governor in the budget. Then her New York Power Authority appointment, a basic appointment to the New York Power Authority, she couldn't get that one through. And then to top it all off, the Seneca Gaming Compact, which she was forced to recuse herself from, which there's hundreds of millions of dollars for the state of New York at stake. She couldn't get that through the Democratic Assembly, including her allies from up here in Western New York. So I look at all those things and I see a trend. I see the legislature openly defying the governor. I see the governor unable to get things through the legislature, including these are Democrats that control both houses. And she's also been, it seems she's also been hesitant to want to work with the Republicans, even where I think there's opportunities to do that. So a weak governor, but also someone who seems to not understand 2 and 3 moves ahead. She just seems in over her head. And when you're learning on the job, as you know, Chairman, at any executive role, but when you're learning on the job as governor, New Yorkers are going to pay the price.
yeah, I think they have. So, in terms of poor leadership, let me talk to you a minute or two about New York City and how it affects the rest of the state. So, Mayor Adams and the New York City Council repeatedly have shown that they really have very little interest in the concerns of New Yorkers outside of the 5 boroughs. It's a little startling, in fact. It's the level of arrogance here. The illegal migrant issue being the most recent example, frankly. You're an outspoken opponent to New York City's arrogance. So is your whole conference, really. In fact, and I really think a lot of people don't realize this, that the majority of senators outside the city of New York are actually Republican, which we never talk about, but just the way New York City falls into this with
Sure.
just one Republican senator in New York City currently. So let me just say, how do you fight City Hall? And you know what City Hall I'm talking about, and win?
So I'll try to answer it this way, if I could. So you're right. There's no question that there is an arrogance that comes sometimes from New York City electeds, New York City Democrats, maybe specifically, towards not only the Republicans, but really towards the rest of the state, including members of their own party who may not reside or represent New York City. And you need to look no further than what they did to Long Island. They had a majority. When I became leader, there were 9 senators on Long Island. 6 of them were Democrats. 3 were Republicans. Today, there are 7 Republicans and 2 Democrats. So it's completely flipped around. In fact, even more so. And that's because of the arrogance of the way they treated Long Island concerns and Long Island members. And the city decided we're going to do what we think is best from our vantage point. And if you don't like it, or if it's going to make you lose your race, tough. But what that really says is an arrogance to the people who live in those places, right? It's not an arrogance towards Rob Ord. It's an arrogance to the people who elected Rob Ord. It's an arrogance to the people who live on Long Island. And it's unfortunate because look at New York City. While I didn't grow up there, and there's, I don't know that I would ever want to live there. That, I come from but I tell you what, New York City is a great. There is no city that is more emblematic of the United States of America than New York City. I mean, literally, when you think of America, if you ask most people in their head, some symbol of New York City would pop up: the Statue of Liberty, the Empire State Building, the the World Trade Center. Obviously, what happened there, the One World, the Freedom Tower. Just the ethnic diversity. You think of all of that. Is also emblematic of the United States of America and certainly New York State. And so we should all want New York City to be healthy, to be strong, and not to be riddled with crime, and not to be chasing people out of New York City because they can't afford to live there, and chasing businesses out. And that arrogance ultimately, I think, is hubris. And you find it, I'm a student of history. You often find it in civilizations and in cities and in cultures that are actually on the brink of decline. They're still living off this idea that we're the biggest and baddest. But what we know is people are leaving New York City and New York State, and they're going to other states. They're going to other cities. It's not, we can't exist off what we used to be forever. We have to, look to the future. And I think that's true for the Republican Party. You mentioned we have one senator there. I think we have to be able to go into New York City as a conservative, as Republicans, and be able to articulate our message in places like Brooklyn, in places like Queens, obviously places like Staten Island, and even in Manhattan, and the Bronx. We have to be able to go into these places and offer an alternative vision from what they're getting. Because if they're only getting one story, one narrative, then yeah, we're not going to do very well there. But I think there's enough people right now in New York City, in parts of the city, that are saying there's got to be a different way. There's got to be an alternative, and they'd be desperate to seize it if it was only presented to them. And so I think as a conservative Republican philosophy or center-right movement, we have to be able to carry our message even in places that historically have not, voted overwhelmingly for us. And maybe that's how we save New York City. Maybe that's how we save New York State. Maybe that's how we save the United States of America.
So actually, the next question kind of drills a little bit more with some specificity into what you were talking about. So I think not surprisingly, you would know that our audience is looking to see more Republican conservative state senators, more Republican conservative assembly members. I mean, it's so clear it's the only way we're going to be able to successfully fight back. And a lot of our frustrations are clearly due to the lack of Republican conservative elected officials. So could you tell us a little bit more about the conference's plans to win more seats and how the Conservative Party can help?
So I think the simplest answer to how the Conservative Party can help is, and it's a two-way street, right? I mean, we need to understand that we have no shot as a Republican Party. There's no chance to get back statewide offices or to take back the Senate without the Conservative Party as an ally. And so we need to remember on key issues, we need to remember who we are and what we're fighting for. And I think people, they don't want mealy-mouthed, I'm not sure how I feel, or I give you they want people who have certain areas where they're principled and they take stands, even if they don't totally agree with them. They'd rather have that person representing them in Albany or Washington than somebody who's not really sure of their moral compass or of their political philosophy. So I think we need to continue to do a good job of working with our conservative allies and base, conservative voters, but also we need the Conservative Party. We need people to remember that, the Republican Party today, I think we can clearly see, it's not about, is this guy Republican or conservative enough? We are up against a socialist movement. And so we need to band together to elect the most conservative person that can win in different parts of the state. Obviously, if you're up in my area, you can get the most conservative, which is, I think, me. But there's other parts of the state where you're not gonna be able to win the election with somebody who maybe is 100% conservative rating. But that's not the option, because right now the person sitting in that seat has a 10% conservative rating. They're actually doing harm to our state, to our republic, to our values. And we need someone who can, push back against that. And so I think we need to recognize that the opponent is not internally. The opponent is very real. It is people, and you know who I'm talking about. Many of them are from the city of New York. They not only do they not support conservative Republicans, I would argue they're trying to change America. They're trying to change the country that you and I are continuing to fight for. And so we need to band together. Our plan is to gain seats across the state, which we have to do. We have to win seats in upstate New York, Rochester, Syracuse. We have to win seats in the Finger Lake or in the Hudson Valley, Capital Region. But then there's no question, we have got to make inroads. We cannot expect to speak statewide and to win statewide office and to be a governing party unless we can win seats in New York City. You can't go around it. There's just no way to do it. It makes no sense. We got to be in the city. We got to be speaking to the same voters, by the way, who are electing Republicans and conservatives to the city council. I mean, it's happening on the ground level there. And I think that's a sign that there is a reservoir. There are people who are thirsty for real center-right leadership in the city of New York. And we just got to field the right candidates who can carry that message and carry that banner. And that's what we're working along with Senator George Borrello, who's our campaign chair, to recruit those candidates all over New York State that can win in the areas that they're going to represent.
Good, thank you. Let me just say this to you about the city. We came out of the primary, when I say we, the Republican and Conservative parties came out of the primaries yesterday with 3 or 4 additional opportunities to hold everything we got, and 3 or 4 very real opportunities to be competitive this November. And we actually continue to see trends in the emerging communities that leaned our way in terms of, even within the Democratic primaries, we saw the crazies being defeated by more reasonable Democrats who are really not truly reasonable. But, you saw Charles Barron get defeated yesterday by a Democrat who's talking about more funding for the police.
Right.
So you have some things occurring here which lend themselves to, as you said, some growth in the city. Obviously, the lines that the Democrats put together, these legislative lines, they try to work against us, but they can't always win on that. Sometimes that is not enough.
No, I think, look, voters have a weird way of correcting. When I say we, folks who are in politics try to always. The reality is it's a competitive venture, and you're always trying to work the system to benefit your side as best you can. I think people know that. No one's surprised by that revelation. I'm not breaking any news here, but the reality is voters have a way of always they're the variable that you can't account for, because people at the end of the day, when they get fed up, they go in the other direction. Even that doesn't mean a Democrat suddenly is a Republican forever. But you saw this with Ronald Reagan at the national level. You saw it with Bill Clinton in the 90s, where there were folks who were on the Republican side who voted for him. You saw it with Donald Trump, quite honestly. There were a lot of Democrats who have voted for him in the 2016 election. So I think locally we saw it with Lee Zeldin. Lee Zeldin actually performed very well in the city of New York for a Republican gubernatorial candidate. He certainly performed well in Long Island. And you saw it underneath him. Every single county in the last election cycle, which every single county performed better for the conservative Republican candidates than they did the cycle before. So those trend lines, it's on us to continue to capture that trend line, to speak to these emerging communities, particularly in the city, where I think you have communities, whether it's the Asian American community, whether it's the Hispanic community, whether it's the Eastern European community. Those communities are not, unlike others who have a long, history in the United States, those communities, I think, are very much up for grabs. I think they're very much free agents when it comes to the two major political parties. And so if we as Republicans and conservatives can speak to the issues that they care about, that's how we win those seats. And that's how we elect more conservative Republicans to the Senate, to the Congress, to the state assembly, and maybe one day to governor, attorney general, and so on.
Well, thank you. Let me ask you this. Do you have any final words for our audience?
I would tell them to not lose hope. I would tell them to take heart that there are folks out here who are not moving to Florida, who are not moving to Texas and Tennessee. And God bless those who have, and I respect their decision to do so, and I understand. But there are folks who are here, like yourself, like myself, like our conference, like a lot of folks. I was just at a meeting in New York City last week. There were 150 like-minded folks at this meeting to hear me speak, to hear Tulsi Gabbard speak, to hear other speakers. And these folks are here investing, fighting the fight to try and save this state, to try and balance this state out. It may never be Texas. It may never be Florida, but it was once a great state where there was a vibrant two-party system. And I think we have to get back there again. And I think your listenership and your viewership should know that you can be part of that solution by getting out, volunteering on a campaign, supporting candidates financially to the extent that you can, being involved, not just being on Twitter and making a comment that, airs your frustration, but really get involved. That's what we need. That's what the Democrats do. They're counting on your apathy. They're counting on you thinking it's hopeless. It's not. And I think Lee Zeldin showed that, and we're trying to show that. And I appreciate your partnership and your friendship and you doing this, because you're a big part of that solution going forward that gives people hope. And I hope to see more of you, obviously, and to continue to work with your party to elect more conservative Republicans and really save this state from turning into a socialist wasteland, which is what I fear some of my colleagues across the aisle are on course to do. So take heart, don't lose hope, stay in the fight. And that's what we're all about. And I appreciate you having me on here.
Well, thank you. Once again, thank you, Senator Ortt, for taking the time to be with us. I personally applaud, and I think the party applauds, the work of you and your GOP Senate colleagues. I see it all the time. It's remarkable the efforts you make to be clear about Republican positions on issues. It's very rewarding to actually watch these press conferences you all have. And as always, I'd like to thank Katie Mahone and Andrew Davis for making this podcast happen. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in today's episode. On our next episode, we'll be joined by United States Congresswoman Claudia Tenney, discuss the very lively congressional session. And she can be very lively when she's discussing the very lively congressional session, I might point out. Thanks again for joining us. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, subscribe wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating. Until next time, I'm Jerry Kassar, and this is the Patriots Podium Podcast. Thank you.